Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode about Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use and talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we're doing part 226. We're definitely getting on there in terms of parts and stuff, but we do have a retired modder, Monsoon. No Waller and Monsoon have been retiring. They're retiring from modding until probably about Planet Zoo 2 comes around in the next year or so, or hopefully this year. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to send them off, and they've really made an awesome mod to send them off. But we've also got 6 other great mods done by a few other great modders. So let's get started. So today we're going to be starting with Meller's duck. So this is done by Lorby. This is a really cool duck. Let's have a look over here. So Meller's duck. So these guys, the Meller's duck or Anas melleri, these guys are a species of dabbling duck in the genus Anas. It is endemic to eastern Madagascar, although there was a population established on Mauritius in the mid-18th century. This is on the verge of extinction due to habitat loss in competition from feral domestic ducks. So this species gets the name, Meller's duck, from the botanist James Charles Meller, and its genus name is just Latin for duck, as you can imagine. So the Meller's duck resembles a large female mallard, and at 55 to 65 centimeters long, or about 22 to 26 inches, they are on average slightly larger than a mallard and are the top size of their genus. However, as opposed to most mallard relatives, they lack a supercilium, and the speculum feathers are green, as in some mallards, but you can see they've also got this white border on them as well, just like the mallard. Their body is dark brown with narrow, paler fringes and to the feathers on the upper parts, and wider fringes on the lower parts. Kind of see there. Its bill, as you can see, is quite a pale grey there. Looks pretty pale grey, with dark patches at the base, and is larger than normal. And its feet and legs, you can see, are also orange. So in terms of behaviour, this is quite an interesting duck in terms of behaviour. Let's see if we can find someone else over here. There we go. No, we'll actually have a look at one running around on the grass. Why not? So Meller's duck breeds apparently most of the year, from May to June in Madagascar, depending on the local conditions, and the Mauritius population will breed October-November. Unlike most of its close relatives, with the exception of the African black duck, they're actually quite fiercely territorial, and furthermore, pairs actually remain mated until the young are independent. So in terms of relations, so due to its outward similarity to Meller's duck, to the female mallard, it is commonly placed close to that species. But based on quasi-forced hybridization under unnatural conditions, it was even proposed that they were just a colour morph of the mallard. Nowadays, it is regarded as one of the most distinct species within the mallards, based on behavioural and comparisons, and also DNA comparisons. Its closest relative is the yellow-billed duck, another early divergent member of the mallardic clade, which these species, as the African duck, is basal, but the exact relationship between the Mellers and the yellow-billed ducks, the species, are obscure, and the dates of these studies are probably far too recent in the face of early Pleistocene fossils of mallards, and there's crude methodology that kind of come to a right estimate. So this species is actually considered endangered by the IUCN. So this is an endangered species. The Lakarota wetlands, which historically had the largest number of these birds were found, suffered a lot of habitat destruction, and their populations declined, with species like the Madagascar polecat being rediscovered in other areas, because this was their main habitat, but they lost a lot of wetland there. The conservation of the species was very much long hampered, as I mentioned before, because they were just dismissed as a variant of the mallard, and they were not very different. There's no special interest. But also due to their drab plumage and territorial habits. They were not very common birds to keep among aviculturists, because they are territorial and not very beautiful, so oftentimes they're like, nah, I don't want to deal with that. Although they reproduce quite rarely in captivity like most ducks, if enough space and good habitat is provided. Although a captive breeding program exists, part of the European Endangered Species Program, not very often kept in zoos, though they can be more frequently seen in European zoos, such as Cologne Zoo, Edinburgh Zoo, Durrell Wildlife Park, and Zurich Zoo. So they are quite common in those regards. So then let's have a look at the Zoopedia quickly. So the wild population is not very big, only a few thousand. So they produce a soft, melodious whistle, distinct from the typical harsh quacking of many ducks. This duck is prominently brown with intricate patterns, aiding camouflage as leafy habitat. Meller's duck primarily feeds on aquatic plants and small invertebrates, showing opportunistic foraging behaviors for survival, very similar to most other species in its genus. They build a nest on the ground near water bodies, may be susceptible to predation, yet unwell hidden among vegetation. My goodness, well, I guess that's not probably the best word for it. Meller's duck is an endemic species of Madagascar, so I found them there. Even though they share a richment with the flamingo, that's a bit weird. But anyway, and we're going to have a look at the cute little baby. Look at the cute little baby. Little baby ducky. Very, very cool. So, next up, we have got, by Great Cakes Mod, we have got the golden pheasant. So let's have a look at these guys here. The golden pheasant. Let's have a look. See you guys sleeping? It looks like you're walking around. So the golden pheasant, or Siderophilus pictus, also known as the Chinese pheasant or the rainbow pheasant. They're a game bird in the order of the galliforms. So in the galliform, the Galicinus birds, and in the pheasant family. Their name comes from ancient Greek, which means with golden crest, and pictus means to painted with a golden crest, pretty much. So these guys were originally formally described by Carl Linnaeus in 1758 as Fasticus pictus, and he specified it was from China, and then it was named in its own genus with the Lady Amherst pheasant, Chrysolophus, by English zoologist John Edward Gray. So we can have a look at the adult male here. That's probably the most impressive one. So the adult male is approximately about 100 centimeters in length, or about a meter long, with a tail accounting for 2/3 of that length, and they weigh between 500 and 700 grams, or about 1 to 2 pounds. Its coloration is characterized by that golden crest and rump, and its bright red body. They also possess an orange cape on the back, and they can spread for display as an alternating black and orange fan that covers all the face except the eyes. The eyes are bright yellow with a pinpoint black pupil, and the face, throat, and chin and the sides of the neck are rusty tan. The wattles and orbital skin are both yellow. As he's having a bit of fight there. Both yellow. The upper back is green, and the rest of the rump is golden yellow. The tertiary feathers on the wing are blue, where the scapulars are quite dark red, and the central tail feathers are black spotted with cinnamon, as you can kind of see there, while the tip of the feathers are a cinnamon buff tail feathers. The upper coverts are the same colour as the central tail feathers. The males also have a scarlet breast and a scarlet and light chestnut flanks and underparts. They also have lower legs that are kind of like a dull colour, as you can kind of notice there. And then we've got a female right here. So the female pheasant, the hen, is about 60 to 80 centimeters, so quite a bit smaller, and is about 24 to 31 inches, and weighs about 350 grams, or 1 pound. Her tail is proportionally longer, making up around roughly half of her body length, and she's much less showy than the male, so she's got a duller mottled brown pattern, similar to that of a female common pheasant, but is darker and more slender. The female's breast and sides are barred buff and blackish brown, and the abdomen is plain buff. She has a buff face and throat. Some abnormal females may later in life actually develop male plumage, or some male plumage. That could be due to hormones and things. With both male and females having yellow bills and yellow legs too, as you can kind of see there. So really, really cool. So these guys are native to the mountainous areas of Western China, but there have been populations established in the United Kingdom, Canada, US, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, the Falkland Islands, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, France, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand. So a lot of large populations have been established because people keep them in aviculture, and people want to hunt them as well. So there's a lot of wild populations as well. Don't know what the heck's going on there. That's a very weird. That's weird. Anyway, we'll carry on. The golden pheasant feeds on the ground on grain, leaves, and invertebrates, but they roost in trees during the night. During winter, flocks tend to forage close to human settlements at the edge of the forest, primarily taking wheat leaves and seeds. While they can climb clumsily in short bursts, they prefer to run at speed most of the time on the ground. This type of flight is commonly known as flapping flight, and due to a lack of a deep layer of pectoralis thoracicus and the tendon that attached to it, so it's an important muscle for being able to flap their wings and properly fly. This muscle is commonly attributed to the stabilization of flight in other birds. However, the absence of this deep layer causes them to more flap and is more similar with other ground birds that just allows them to escape. However, typically they actually just prefer to run rather than... They just prefer to run around and rather to fly. They don't fly very often. In terms of their eggs, we can have a look at the little babies because the babies are very cute. So these little babies, they lay typically 8 to 12 eggs at a time, and they will incubate these eggs for about 22 to 23 days. They tend to eat berries, grubs, and seeds along with other types of vegetation. And the male has kind of a metallic call during the breeding season. So these guys are quite common in zoos across the world because, they're quite beautiful and aviculturists like to keep them. But often hybrid specimens can be found with the lady Amphis pheasant. There's also different mutations that you can get in captivity and things like that, such as the dark-throated yellow cinnamon, salmon, peach, splash, mahogany, and silver. And they often use different ways to kind of get these morphs. And the coloration of these feathers can actually indicate the genetic quality of a male golden pheasant. So hue, brightness, and things like that can usually be measured, and that suggests they actually, got good genetics and stuff like that. So it is tied to their good genetics. But yeah, anyway, a really cool pheasant done by Great Cakes Mod. Next one's also done by Great Cakes Mod, but we're going back into the Miocene of Italy. So we've got this really cool big species of geese or swan or whatever you want to say. So this is Garganonus, or the Gargano bird. These guys are enormous flightless and anatid waterfowl. So this includes ducks, geese, and swans. They're from the late Miocene of Gargano, Italy, and contains one species, Garganonus balmani. And this enormous size is actually suggested to be adaptation to live in open areas and kind of take the niche of a large herbivore, and as a deterrent against the aerial predators that lived in the area like Gargon ictus and the giant bunnel Tyto gigantea. So the tibiotarsus of Garganonus was approximately 30% larger than that of the living moot swan in circumference, and based on the comparisons, it's estimated that this species weighed between 15 to 22 kilograms, or 33 to 49 pounds, which is larger than any living swan or goose or anything like that. This suggests it was actually quite likely it was flightless, so that makes sense. Let's have a look at you there. So the preserved carpometacarpi from the wings had quite a short and robust staft, much shorter than any living large-bodied Anseriforms, and suggest that it wasn't capable of flight. And in some specimens, they also have a small bony knob on the carpometacarpus that is similar to swans and geese and ducks, and they likely would have used that knob for fighting, so that's quite interesting as well. And likewise, they have short and robust with the tarsometatarsals on the foot, and these are traits, and also the trochlear metarsi, kind of 2 and 4, both in the bottom portion are more equal in length. And that makes them more similar to things like the Cape Barren goose, the screamers, and the giant extinct giant swan of Sicily. And this suggests they would have been walking around a lot more. So in terms of its discovery and naming, the first remains of Garganonus were discovered in the Apecia in Gargano, Italy. And the deposits are part of the Miocene microfauna that date back to about 6 to 5 million years ago. So, yeah, quite recent, actually. And there has been other remains found in 2016, that were, even though they were earlier, but they were morphologically comparable because they think they're the same species. And the name means itself is just the Gargano bird, and the specific species name honors Peter Ballman, who described the birds of the local region where this guy's from. Several characteristics of the tibiotarsus allows them to be placed within the Anseriform, so that includes, all those kind of waterfowl and things. And more specifically, there are other features that suggest they are in the family Antanidae, that includes ducks, geese, and swans. What's very interesting as well, they do share a lot of traits with an extinct group of Anseriforms called the Gastornidhidae, so related to things like Gastornis, which was an Anseriform, which is really interesting as well. But they are from the early Paleogene, so they were around right after dinosaurs. If you've seen Walking with Beasts, you know Gastornis. Even though that interpretation is more carnivorous, more recent evidence suggests they were herbivorous. So they were thought to be like a giant duck trying to be a moa or an elephant bird. But this does not mean that they are a relative of these guys, because these guys are from the Miocene. It's like a good 50-60 million year gap between where they existed. So this seems to be like an example of convergent evolution, because these guys got bigger. So the Gastornids were quite big as well. So that seems to be an example of convergent evolution, because they were both getting bigger, so they needed to do that. But yeah, what's really interesting is that the areas that they live in, the Garganos Islands, had a quite diverse bird fauna. There's about 26 different species of birds, including giant eagles, falcons, 3 different species of owls, sandpipers, woodpeckers, songbirds, rails, bustards, and mousebirds, and also corvids. So quite a rich fauna there, but also the various mammals, like the giant mouse, Midcorana, which was also there, very abundant, and other species of mice, or rodents, things like hamsters and things like that. So it was quite a few different species. And if you guys remember the mod, also done by Great Cakes, it's called Dino Galarix, which is a giant kind of hedgehog. They would have lived there as well. And there was also, those kind of species there. They were quite big, with the smaller relatives being around as well, but they were all quite big, kind of taking that big niche in the ecosystem. Other mammals were like shrews, pikas. There was actually a deer-like Hoplomicrinid, which was a species of kind of weird, almost like a chevrotain, like a deer hybrid thing that's not related to them at all, but a really weird thing. And there was also the remains of a crocodile. So very rich fauna, very interesting fauna, as most islands tend to be. As I mentioned, they date back to the Taurian stage of late Miocene, so about 6 million, 5 million years ago. But during the Miocene, these areas were part of an island archipelago, isolated from mainland Europe and Africa. But they thought a lot of these ancestors would have gone by flying or rafting there. But then, when it reconnected with the mainland, a lot of these species would have become extinct as other species came in and became, around there, lived around there. But yeah, very, very cool. So next up, we're going to be moving on to the Mojave Desert Tortoise by Lorby. So let's have a look at this guy. Is that a baby? No, we don't want to look at a baby. We want to look at the parents, not the baby. Let's see if we can find Dad. That's the mum. There you go, there's Dad. So the desert tortoise, or Gophorus azagazi, these guys are a species of tortoise in the family Testudidae. They are native to the Mojave and Sonoran Desert in the United States and Mexico. They are distributed through western Arizona, southeastern California, southern Nevada, and southwestern Utah. And the specific name for the species honors the American zoologist, or the Swiss-American zoologist, Jean-Louis Rudolphi Azagazi. And actually considered the official state reptile of Nevada and California. And they are critically endangered, as we'll get into. So based on their taxonomy, 2011, on the basis of taxonomy, they kind of decided to split the desert tortoise into 2 different species: the Agassiz desert tortoise, the Mosvaca desert tortoise, and the new species name was to honor another, the late Professor David Joseph Mosvaca from California State University, and they managed to split them in a couple other species as well. So this is quite a large tortoise, well, not a large tortoise, but a decent-sized tortoise. They get to about 25 to 36 centimeters in length, or about 10 to 14 inches, with males being slightly larger than females. The male, as you can see here, has got a longer gular horn, and his plastron tends to be more concave compared to a female. Males also have larger tails than females do. They've got quite a high domed shell, as you can see there, and a greenish tan and dark brown in colour. These high domes allowed space for their lungs, and that allows them to maintain thermoregulation, which means they control their body temperature quite well. They range about 10 to 15 centimeters or 4 to 6 inches in height, and can range between 8 to 15 pounds or 3.5 to 7 kilograms. And the front limbs are quite sharp, with claw-like scales that are flattened for digging, and the back legs tend to be slimmer and actually quite long too. So these guys live in, of course, desert habitats. They live in areas with ground temperatures exceeding 60 degrees because of their ability to dig burrows and escape the heat. At least 95% of their lives are actually spent in burrows, and this also protects them from freezing winters while they remain dormant from November to February or March. Within these burrows, these tortoises create a subterranean environment that can be beneficial to other desert animals such as reptiles, mammals, birds, and invertebrates. I mentioned they had divided them into a couple of different species. The isolated population of tortoise in the Black Mountains is northwestern Arizona. They live in different types of habitat, from sandy flats to rocky foothills, and they do like it around the Mojave Desert as well. They do also have very strong site fidelity, so have well-established home ranges where they know where all the resources are, and they can live up from nearly sea level to about 1,000 meters in elevation, which is quite interesting as well. Typically, the home ranges are about 4 to 40 hectares, or 10 to 100 acres, and the males have larger home ranges than females, with home range and size increasing with resources and rainfall. In terms of the soil type, these guys are quite like to burrow in. They are sensitive to soil type, because they rely on their burrows for shelter. And then the reduction of water loss and how to regulate their body temperature. The soil should crumble easily during digging, but should also be firm enough to resist collapsing, so you don't want to trap the tortoise. Desert tortoises prefer sandy, loam soils with varying amounts of gravel and clay, and tend to avoid sands or soils with low water holding capacity, excess salts, or low resistance to flooding. They all may also consume soil that has adequate calcium levels, and actually may prefer sites with high calcium content because they've got to make bones and shells. Desert tortoises, as I mentioned, mostly live in their burrows, rock shelters, or pallets that helps them regulate their body temperature or reduce water loss. So these burrows, dug in the soil by these tortoises or other animals, they use the depressions in the soil, and they use them related to their availability and the climate. The number of burrows used can be frequent quite a bit, so males tend to make deeper burrows than the females, and seasonal trends in burrow use is influenced by the sex of the tortoise, or male or female, and regional variation. Desert tortoises seek sites often associated with plant or rock cover, and they often will lay their eggs in a sufficiently deep soil at the entrance of burrows under scrubs, and these nests tend to be about 8 to 25 centimeters. Shelter is quite important for their body temperature and allows them to keep their body at a good body temperature even throughout the summer and winter. Really hot, really cold, and the humidity as well is quite important. Each desert tortoise uses about 5 to 25 burrows a year, and some burrows use repeatedly and sometimes for even several years, and they often will share these burrows with different animals such as white-tailed antelope squirrels, wood rats, collared peccaries, burrowing owls, quails, rattlesnakes, and Gila monsters, and also beetles and scorpions and things. And one burrow can host even about 23 tortoises, which is quite funny as well. So in terms of breeding, the species, let's have a look at the little baby here. This is very, very cute. So tortoises mate in spring to autumn, and male desert tortoises grow 2 white glands around their chin. Funny enough, they call them chin glands. A male circles around the female, biting her shell in the process. He then climbs upon the female and inserts his member as well, and climbs on her in the cloaca, which is located around the tail. And they make grunting noises, which is quite funny. After that all's done, the female will lay a clutch of about 4 to 8 hard-shelled eggs, which are the size and shape of little ping pong balls, usually around June or July. The eggs hatch in August or September, and wild female tortoises produce up to 3 clutches a year, depending on the climate. Their eggs then incubate for about 90 to 135 days, with some eggs actually overwintering and hatching during the following spring. There was also a laboratory experiment where they looked at the kind of the rates of incubation to sexual, the sex of the hatchlings. So they do have temperature determinant sex determination. So higher temperatures will typically produce males, and lower temperatures will typically produce females. And so it takes them, once they hatch out, it takes them about 16 years to reach maturity. So they grow quite slowly, and it takes them about 16 years to get to about 20 centimeters in length. This growth can vary a little bit on location and age and gender and precipitation as well, with male and females growing at similar rates, but males growing longer. They typically reach maturity at about 15 to 20 when they're about 18 centimeters or about 7 inches. However, it is possible for them to mature faster, as 10-year-old females seem to able to reproduce. In terms of activity, the activity tends to come around on the location. So let's actually have a look at the female. Let's see if we can find a female. Is that a male there or a female? So in terms of locations, so It peaks in late spring in the Mojave Desert and late summer in the Sonoran Desert, with some populations having two peaks of activity during the year. They tend to brumate during the winter, from November to February or April, and females will begin brumating later and emerge earlier than males, and juveniles enter brumation earlier than adults too, or emerge from brumation earlier. The temperatures obviously strongly kind of influence this, although the desert tortoise can survive body temperatures of below freezing and over 40. Most occur at temperatures between 26 and 34 degrees. And the influence of their temperature reflects their daily activity, with some tortoises often being active late in the morning during spring and fall, early in the morning and late in the evening during summer, or kind of sometimes even being active during relatively warm winter afternoons, which is quite interesting as well. They do spend majority of time at their shelter, though movements of up to 200 meters a day being common. This common, comparatively short-distance movements pretty much represent foraging activity, traveling to burrows and potentially seeking mates. But long distance, could potentially be dispersing into new areas and looking for, or using new areas of their range. So the lifespan of a desert tortoise can range from between 50 to 80 years, and the main cause of mortality in desert tortoises include predators, human-related causes, diseases, and environmental factors such as droughts and flooding and fires. The death rate for adults is typically only a few percent, but it's much higher for young desert tortoises, with only about 5% of hatchlings making it to adulthood. So that's very interesting as well. In terms of diet, they are a herbivore like most other tortoises. Grasses form the bulk of their diets, but they'll also eat the herbs, annual wildflowers, and new growth of cacti, as well as fruit and flowers as well. They'll sometimes eat rocks as well, and soil, so they can maintain their kind of digestive bacteria and give some calcium as well. And they get much of their water intake from the grasses and wildflowers they get, and they are able to pretty much go out without drinking for most of their time, because they're able to reabsorb water and stuff like that. And they can actually empty their bladder as a defense mechanism, but that can leave them very vulnerable because it may take them a while to get more water. So if you see a wild tortoise, do not hold them and hope they don't pee, because we don't want them getting sick or anything from that. But in terms of their conservation and their predation, so in the wild, most of their predators would be things like ravens, Gila monsters, kit foxes, badgers, roadrunners, coyotes, and fire ants. They're all natural predators and will typically prey on the eggs and juveniles, or in some cases even adults, though ravens are thought to cause significant levels of juvenile tortoise predation in areas like the Mojave Desert that are near urbanized areas. But typically, once they're adults, they're typically safe from most things that you've mentioned. Most of them are pretty safe. But the most significant threats to these tortoises are urbanization, disease, habitat destruction and fragmentation, illegal collection and vandalism by humans, and habitat conversion by invasive plant species, which leads to them being critically endangered. So desert tortoises in some areas declined as much as 90% since the 1980s, and the Mojave population is considered threatened under the Endangered Species Act. And there's other populations, it's unlawful to touch them or harass them or collect them as well. There's actually one with a computer chip embedded on their back for reference as well. The Fort Irwin National Training Center in the US Army extends the area was a habitat of about 2,000 tortoises as well, and all of them were actually moved to better habitats as well. Another potential threat for this species is actually solar farms and wind farms. So the result of legislation, solar energy comprised companies have been making plans for huge projects in the desert, which gets rid of habitat. And while these guys are actually able to withstand tough conditions and high temperatures, they're unable to cope with the dangers of human development, such as the use of off-roading vehicles. They come along at high speed and crush the tortoises, or run over their eggs and burrows, and significantly impact their population. And there actually was a project that the Empire Solar Power Project that they're concerned about the impacts, and they believe that the impact of this thermal project would have affected about 1,000 tortoises. So that's a bit of a worry about that. And there's actually a lawsuit. The Public Employees of Environmental Responsibility actually filed a lawsuit against the National Park Service for not taking measures to manage tortoise shooting in the Mojave National Preserve in California. They discovered a bunch of gunshot wounds in dead tortoises, and which are likely caused long after natural death as these shells take 5 years to disintegrate. These cells left behind by nature, droughts, road kill, and vandals may have attracted ravens and threatened healthy tortoises as well. So that's a big issue as well. And they're also quite susceptible to diseases, and collecting them and keeping them is pretty much illegal. So I won't go too much into that. But yeah, really, really cool animal. Really, really cool to see a tortoise. You know, I love seeing more reptiles as well in the game. See, another great one, Lorby. You've done a great job. So next up, we have got a couple species, subspecies of zebra. So this one here is the maneless zebra, as you can imagine. So it looks very interesting. It looks very distinct from other zebras, you know, because it's got no mane. It looks almost like weird. But yes, this is the maneless zebra, or Equus quagga boensis. And this is a subspecies of the plain zebra spread across all of the northern parts of Africa and ranges from Kenya down to the Uganda, and is found in South Sudan, east of the White Nile as well, and is the northmost population of the northernmost subspecies of the plain zebra. And the last remaining substantial population is in Kanepo Valley National Park. So the mainland zebra was first described in 1921 by the Swedish zoologist Einar Longberg, and he gave the name Equus boensis based on a type specimen he collected down of town of Bor in South Sudan. And later the main zebra was described by several others, and then it was concluded, but research found it was one of 4 species as well, and this was the only subspecies where male infanticides was not found. So these guys tend to be quite good dads, which is fun as well. So it's the maneless zebra. Looks really, really cool. Another really cool subspecies. Looks really, really cute. How are you? Really, really cool. So have a look at that. So look, Ethiopia, Northern Kenya, Somalia. Most striking feature the absent or extreme reduction of the upright striped mane, typical of the zebras. Giving it a donkey-like appearance. You can definitely see the donkey appearance. It has narrow, closely spaced black stripes with a white background that often extends fully down the legs, but may be faded on the belly. Adapted to harsh, dry environments, they are threatened with habitat loss, hunting, and civil unrest in its native range. So let's see. The maneless zebra is the only subspecies that consistently lacks a prominent upright mane, giving it a unique smooth appearance. It is adapted to some of the hottest, driest areas inhabited by any zebra, surviving in the arid grasslands of the Horn of Africa. The scientific name borensis refers to the Boma Plateau in South Sudan, part of its historic range. Due to political instability in remote habitats, it is one of the least studied, most threatened zebra subspecies, and its reduced mane may be an adaptation to reduce heat retention in its extremely hot native environment. See, that makes sense. And we've got a little cute little baby. Looks really weird without a mane, but you've really done a good job. I'd like to see more of these. And then next up we have the Chapman's zebra, so another subspecies there. I'm not going to go too much in detail about the subspecies because they're really not that different, to be completely honest. So here is the Chapman zebra. So the Chapman zebra was named after explorer James Chapman, who was a subspecies of plain zebra from southern Africa. So this is the one you're probably most familiar with, to be honest. So these guys are found in savannas and similar habitats to northeastern South Africa, north of Zimbabwe, west into Botswana, and also Namibia and Angola. So they're found in quite a few habitats. And they're not really that different, but the way that they're distinguished from other subspecies is the subtle variations of their stripes. So it's kind of the way that's described. The pastoral, they also have somewhat brown stripes as well. And in addition to the white stripes that are typical for zebras. The pattern is not completely black on the lower half, and each zebra has its own unique stripe pattern as well. And when voles are born, they have brown stripes. In some cases, it also develop black coloration on the hides, and then they keep the stripes brown. So yeah, that's quite interesting as well. So the Chapman zebra is extinct in places like Leslo and due to droughts and stuff like that, though human settlements have impacted their sizes. There are places trying to create more these programs, trying to breed them in captivity and try and save them as well, like the Verbi Zoological Park. They've been creating more realistic environments for the zebras so they could potentially be introduced. They also suffer from diseases that they can get. But yeah, typically they're not too different from other zebras. So let's have a look at the Zoopedia. So, Equus chapmani, southern plain zebra subspecies, distinguished for its shadow stripes, brownish grey bands between its bold and overlying with age. The strips potentially, or let me flip that. The strips often lighten with age. The strips typically fade on the hindquarters and legs and may not extend fully to the belly. They inhabit savannas and grasslands of southern Africa through Botswana and southern Angola, adapting for both arid and monolithic environments. It is doing okay, about 50,000 individuals. We mentioned that one of the most common zebra subspecies in southern African game reserves and parks, so that's the one you're probably most familiar with. Unlike some zebras, its stripes do not extend to the belly. So if you look at the extend to the belly, we already mentioned who it was named after. And they can live in both the Kalahari and the Okavango Delta, so quite a few different habitats. That's quite interesting as well. So yeah, Sky Polaris did both these zebras, really, really good. But last but certainly not least, we've got something really cool. This was done by Monsoon. We have got the Walrus. Let's have a look at these guys. So the Walrus, or Obenus romanus, these guys are a large marine mammal pinniped with a discontinuous population across the North Pole and the Arctic Ocean and subantarctic seas in the Northern Hemisphere. So they're the only extant species within their family, Obedontidae, in the genus name Obibenus. They are also divided into two subspecies, the Arctic walrus, which is a type subspecies, and the dividends, the Pacific walrus. So very, very interesting. So the word actually walrus is thought to either be Dutch or Old Norse, which means horse whale, so that's quite funny. The specific name Ramosa Scandinavian, though. So the Norwegian name Skusha refers to date and Ramosa Rosvere, and with walrus as well, but they're now extinct in Iceland and Norway, with the word evolving from Greenland. Their name, the compound, genus name is kind of Obenus, which means obus, which means teeth, and Bano means walking. So they believe that they kind of use their teeth to walk or pull themselves onto ice. So they kind of use them as walking teeth or to walk with teeth. And their specific name kind of means bite as well. So very interesting how animals get their name. So these guys actually form their own group. They are a member of the pinnipeds, so they are related to seals, sea lions, and walruses are typically their own thing. They split from other species of walruses. The obenids split from the otarids or the true eared seals from about 20 to 26, the phocids or the true seals about 20 to 26 million years ago, and the eared seals about 50 to 20 million years ago. So they're more closely related to air seals than they are to true seals. They were a highly diverse family. There's believed to be at least 20 species within their group, but the walrus is the last surviving member of today, and they're the last species of their group. So there is two subspecies I mentioned, the Atlantic walrus and the Pacific walrus. And the first, the differences are shown that actually they're quite recent, only within the last 500,000 years or 758,000 years, they would have split from each other. And these dates coincide with the hypothesized derived from fossils, as they believe to have actually evolved from tropical or subtropical ancestors that became isolated in the Atlantic Ocean and adapted to the cooler conditions. Today, they're obviously mostly found in Arctic regions, but successful breeding populations have been seen on Sable Island, southeastern Nova Scotia, and even Maine until the early colonial period. Abundant walruses have also been recovered from the North Sea during the interglacials, so they would have been found, Greenland, Iceland, places like that. So as well, and even historically, in the last ice age, they would have been found as far south as North Carolina. So that's quite interesting too. So some outsized Pacific males can weigh much as 2 tons. Most walruses typically weigh between 800 and 700 kilograms, or between 18,000 to 3,700 pounds. So that's very interesting as well. The Atlantic subspecies is slightly smaller, about 10% smaller or 20% smaller, with male walruses, Arctic walruses, weighing on average about 900 kilograms. And, these big walruses are between 800 and 700, so I'd say maybe even a little bit ton for them. They also tend to have, the Atlantic walrus has technically shorter tusks as well, and somewhat of a more flattened snout. And females weigh about 2/3 the weight of the males here. So the Atlantic females average about 560 kilograms, and sometimes can even weigh as little as 400 kilograms. And the Pacific females weigh on average about 800 kilograms as well. So there's definitely some big animals there. In terms of their lengths, though, lengths typically range between 2.2 to 3.6 meters, or 7 feet to 11 feet, nearly 12 feet long. And newborn walruses are already born quite large. They get between 33 and 85 kilograms, or about 73 to 187 pounds, and be about 3 feet to 4 feet long, which is quite interesting as well. And compared to other species of, pinniped, they are considered the third largest. They're just behind the other two species of elephant seal in size. It's quite interesting as well. And you can see they've got such a fluffy big bodies and stuff like that, as we'll get into. They share features of both, aired sea lions and seals. They can turn their rear flippers like like sea lions and move on all fours. However, they tend to swim. This is inaccurate because it's based on a sea lion, but they tend to swim more like true seals, so almost like swimming, like a fish, mostly side to side. And they also lack external ears, just like those guys. So they're definitely in like a little bit of their own. They're kind of like a mix. In terms of their tusk and dentition, while this is not true for all extinct walruses, the most prominent feature of modern walruses is their long tusks. The elongated canines, and are present in both males and females, though males have much larger ones. They can get up to about a meter long, as you can kind of see there. Let's see if they come up and say hello. So they can get up to about a meter long, as you see, quite long there, and weigh up to 5 kilograms, or about 12 pounds. Tusk is slightly longer and thicker among males, and they use them to fight for dominance and for display, with the strongest males with the largest tusks typically being the dominant ones. They also use them to form and maintain holes in the ice and also aid them to climb out. And they were actually once thought to use these tusks to dig out prey from the seabed, but analyses into the wear patterns on their teeth suggest that they didn't actually do this. And they thought they would have used their snout for digging. And while the dentition of these walrus, they generally have fewer teeth than other than the tusks, and they typically just only have a few teeth, so they rely a lot more on suction, which is quite interesting as well. So we'll have a look at a female. Let's see if we can spot a female there. Are they all out of the water? Oh, they're all thinking about it. We'll have a look at you, miss. You're quite cool. So they do have whiskers. You can see they've got a broad mat of quite stiff bristles, also called vibrissae, which means basically for whiskers. They give the walrus that, whiskered appearance, like Jamie Hyneman. There can be 400 to 700 of them in 13 to 15 rows, and they can reach up to about a foot long. And in the wild, they're often worn much shorter due to constant use. They're attached to muscles and are supplied with bloods and nerves, so they're highly sensitive, so they're able to use them to feel around in the seabed looking for food to eat. And also they've got some really interesting skin. They're sparsely covered in fur, and they do appear bald, and their skin is quite highly wrinkled and thick, up to 10 centimeters, or about 4 inches, around the neck and shoulders of males. The blubber layer beneath is up to about 15 centimeters, or about 6 inches thick, with young walruses being a deep brown and grow paler and more cinnamon coloured as they age, with old males being nearly pink. And because blood vessels contract in cold water, they can almost always appear white while swimming. And as a secondary sexual characteristic, males actually have bosses or nodules along their necks and shoulders. That's quite interesting as well. And they also have an air sac under their throat, which acts like a flotation bubble and allows them to bob in the water. And they also have a large baculum, and that can get up to about 63 centimeters and makes it the largest, or 25 inches, and makes it the largest for any land mammal. So, good on you, walrus. So we're going to have another look at you. You're going to have a look at the baby. Let's look at the baby. Very, very cute. Cute little baby. So walruses typically live about 20 to 30 years in the wild, and the males will reach sexual maturity as early as 7. But do not typically breed until about 15, because, they got to be big and strong to fight off the other males. They rut between January through April, decreasing their food intake dramatically, and the females will begin ovulating about 6 years old, or 4 to 6. The females are diastrous and come to heat in late summer and around February, yet the males are fertile only in February. But potential fertility in the second period is unknown, so we don't know why. Breeding occurs from January to March, peaking in February, with males aggregate in the water around icebound groups of estrus females and engage in competitive vocal displays, with females joining them to copulate in the water. So once they get pregnant, the female can actually gestate the baby for about 11 to 16 months. The first 3 or 4 months is actually spent in a blastula and suspended development, and they have delayed implantation, which is common among pinnipeds, and that is evolved to optimize both the mating season and the breeding season, determined by ecological conditions that promote the survival of the newborn. Calves are born during the spring, from April to June, and they weigh between 45 and 75 kilograms at birth and are able to swim. The mother nurses them for over a year before weaning, but the young can spend up to 5 years with their mothers. Walrus milk contains a higher amount of proteins and fats compared to land mammals, but it is actually lower compared to true seals. And this lower fat content in turn means they grow slower, and the calves they have a longer nursing investment from their mothers. Young may be suckled at sea as well as on land, making them the only pinniped to exhibit aquatic suckling. And because ovulation is suppressed under the calf is weaned, females give birth at most every 2 years, leaving the walrus with the lowest reproductive rate of any pinniped. In terms of migration as well, the rest of the year they tend to form massive aggregations of about 10 to thousands on rocky beaches and outcrops. The migration between the ice and the beach can be long distance and dramatic, and in late summer and spring, for example, several 100,000 Pacific walruses migrate from the Bering Sea into the Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait. And some of them are quite interesting vagrants. There have been some that got to Scotland, England, and stuff like that. And if they get quite famous, they get a name like Wally the Seal, that was a few years ago, came around. And they become popular because, they're quite funny and people like seals. But yes, let's talk about their habitat. Is that the boy there? No, that's the female. Where's he gone? There he's swimming all over. Look at him. Because he's being all impressive. So the majority population of the Pacific walrus spends its summer in the Bering Strait and in the Arctic Ocean, and also around eastern Siberia, around Wrangel Island, and the northern shores of Alaska. Smaller numbers also live around the Chinese Chinsky Peninsula in Bristol Bay and Alaska as well. They winter over in the Bering Sea and then come over the Chapman population as well. And there's a 28,000-year-old fossil walrus that was dredged up from the bottom of San Francisco, suggesting they ranged that far south during the Ice Age. Commercial harvesting reduced the populations of the Pacific walrus between 50,000 and 100,000 in the 1950s and 60s, but limits have allowed them to kind of allowed the population to increase, but subsequently they again began to decline, with censuses being around 220,000 eels, not 8,000 in each survey. In comparison, the Pacific walrus is estimated to be about 250,000 based in 2006, and so it has indeed gone down. There's a much smaller population. The Atlantic population is much rarer. They range from the Canadian Arctic, across Greenland, Svalbard, and much of Arctic Russia. There's 8 or so populations. As I mentioned, they once ranged off Sable Island of Nova Scotia, and could be found in large numbers in the range of St. Lawrence as well, but now they're considered quite risky. And also, as I mentioned, they would historically have been found in Iceland and Greenland, so they historically had a much bigger range. They were wiped out on Iceland by the Norse as well. And even though they can dive, in terms of their diet, they tend to prefer shallow shelf regions and feed on the seafloor, other from sea ice platforms. They're not particularly deep divers, but they, with the deepest dives mostly recorded, have been about 31 to 17 meters, so not much more than 100 feet deep. But more recent studies actually found dives that exceeded 500 meters, so they can dive quite deep if they want to. They have quite a diverse and opportunistic diet, these guys. They feed on about 60 genera of marine organisms that include shrimp, crabs, spoonworms, tube worms, corals, tourniquets, sea cucumbers, various mollusks like snails and cephalopods, some types of slow-moving fish, and even pinnipeds. So other pinnipeds, that's quite interesting as well. However, it does prefer benthic bivalve mollusks like clams, in which they kind of forage by grazing along the sea bottom, searching and identify them with their sensitive whiskers, and then cleaning the muck around them with jets of water and apple flipper movement. What they'll do is then they'll suck the meat out by sealing its powerful lips around the organism and withdrawing its pistol-like tongue rapidly into their mouth, using it like a vacuum. And the walrus's palate is uniquely vaulted, allowing efficient suction, with measurements suggesting they can, have quite a good suction there. They're easily able to suck a 5-pound metal plug out of the bottom of a pool at a water depth of about 1 meter. So they've got very strong suction, and that allows them to suck out the insides of these, animals from their shells, which is very interesting. Aside from the large number of organisms actively consumed by walruses, their foraging actually has a big impact on the seabeds that they live around. So they disturb the seafloor, which releases nutrients into the water column that allows the mixing and movement of many organisms as well. So they're quite important for ecosystems. And as I mentioned as well, seal tissue has been found in these guys. They have been observed with a fairly significant portion of seal tissues in their stomachs. But the importance of seals in their diet is kind of under debate. There have been isolated observations of walruses preying upon seals up to about 200 kilograms, or about 440 pounds, a bearded seal. There are even reports of them sucking out their brains because they've got such powerful suction, they just suck it out through their nose. But really, incidents of walruses preying on seabirds and stuff like that have been documented. And they've also been seen occasionally preying on ice entrapped narwhals or scavenging on whale carcasses, but there is little evidence for this. And due to their great size and tusks, they really only have two natural predators, the orca and the polar bear. However, they do not make a major part of their diets because they're quite big and they can defend themselves quite well. Polar bears typically hunt them on the beaches and will often consume the individuals crushed or wounded when they kind of rush them back into the ocean, typically young individuals. But there have been isolated walruses when they overwinter, and sometimes the bear may try and attack them. However, even an injured walrus is quite a formidable opponent for a polar bear, and direct attacks often rare. And with these tusks, they're very much easily able to injure a polar bear. And if they get in the water, then the walrus has the upper hand over the bear. Polar bear kind of walrus battles have been often extremely protracted and exhausting, and bears have been known to break away from the attack after injuring a walrus. And orcas do regularly hunt them, and they have been, but walruses have successfully defended themselves against orcas, with their tusks, against the larger whales. But however, orcas have been observed successfully attacking walruses with few or no injuries, so they can hunt them regularly. In terms of their conservation, during the 18th and 19th century, they were quite heavily exploited by sealers and whalers that led to the near extinction of the Atlantic subspecies. As early as 1871, traditional hunters were expressing concerns about the numbers of walruses being hunted by these fleets, and luckily now it's commercially outlawed unless you're, a native Inuit or Yupok or Cherokee peoples that are allowed to kill about 7,000 a year. And the traditional hunters use all parts of the walruses to make, to survive. They use the meat for nutrition. They use the flippers and store them actually as a delicacy. The tusks and bones are used for tools. The oils are rendered and used for warmth and light. The hides are used to make boats and house covers, and the intestines and linings are make waterproof packs and stuff like that. So they're very important to their diets as well. Also, it is regulated by Russia and the United States and Greenland. They regulate the hunting. They estimate no more than 7,000 walruses are harvested every year, which is trying to make sure they're sustainable. And they may actually be vulnerable to climate change. So the effects of climate change are another big concern for them. So the extent and thickness of pack ice has reached unusually low levels in recent years. When typically walruses actually rely on these ice while giving birth and aggregations during the reproductive periods, with thinner pack ice over the Bering Sea, reducing the amount of resting habitat and the optimal feeding grounds. And while this more widely separates lactating females from their calves, causing more stress and lowering reproductive rates. Reduced coastal sea ice has also been implicated in the increase of stampeding deaths on the shorelines of places like Russia and Western Alaska, with trends indicating that Pacific walrus is likely to continue to decline or shift further north, but they may actually be managed with careful conservation management. And currently, 2 of the 3 walrus subspecies are considered least concern, and the other one's data deficient. So luckily, they're doing quite well in most regards. They're still doing quite well. As I mentioned, they are considered. Let's see, are they considered least concern? Oh, they're considered vulnerable. But they are, they're not doing too bad at the moment. But they could get worse, with climate change. So because they are an Arctic species after all. And there was a small population that were almost wiped out from Svalbard after 300 years of hunting. But now, let's see if we can spot a female swim around. But now, they're actually considered, there's a population of 5,000. They're also considered quite important in the folklore of the region of many Arctic peoples. There's kind of a myth of one raven, represents the sun and moon as an evil spirit, and kind of recovers the sun and moon for an evil spirit by seducing his daughter. The angry father throws his daughter off a high cliff, and then when she drops in the water, she becomes a walrus. And according to various legends, the tusks are either formed by trails of mucus or by the weeping girl's hair or long braids. This myth is probably related to the old walrus-headed woman who rules the bottom of the sea, so there's a lot of kind of different gods and things like that. Other literature, they were mentioned a lot in The Walrus and the Carpenter and Lewis Carroll's poem that appeared in Through the Looking Glass. And they often mention they eat a lot of oysters, which is actually more reflected to the natural diet. Captive ones are more fed fish, but their more natural diet is mostly clams. And there's other things they're often mentioned in, including Jungle Book, ironically. But yeah, really, really cool. So that's a great mod by Monsoon. As I mentioned, they are retiring, but this is definitely a great mod to end on, especially after spending so much time working on this and doing a lot of great mods. And I know there's been people wanting a good Walrus for a while. There's been a couple attempts, and this has definitely been an awesome attempt. So a great mod to end on, Monsoon. So yeah, thank you Monsoon for the Walrus, and of course I'll thank everyone else. Thank you Polaris for the Sky Polaris for the zebras. Thank you Great Cakes for the pheasant and the giant goose, and thank you Lorby for the duck and the tortoise. So really, really awesome job there, guys. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always look at the little bell icons to get notified of anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye.